Welcome, everybody. In this next section, we're going to look at Module 3. So we're going to start with some calculations. Again, the section is very heavy on formulas and calculations, but working with how to do some calculations with dates and times as well. So that's where we're going to start. One thing I want to show you here, so this is just a file provided by your textbook, looking at staffing needs and call center logs and things like that. This workbook does have quite a lot of formulas in it. So one thing that is recommended if you have a lot of formulas and you need other people to be able to follow along, or even for yourself, right? If it's something that you know you're going to maybe forget months from now how you did it or what you were looking for, at the bottom you'll notice that there is a tab or a sheet that says formula and key terms. And this is something that we do suggest adding in, again, particularly if your workbook is going to have a lot of calculations or some difficult calculations as well. So this is a nice addition to workbooks, again, that have a lot of calculations or more difficult ones, or just to help explain to the reader what was going on in the workbook. So to start here, we're going to use a couple of the first two here. So we're going to be looking at the call center log information, and we're going to be looking at two things. One, we'd like to know how long people are waiting before their call is answered, and then two, how long the calls tend to be. We'd like to keep track of wait times, right? We don't want our wait times to be super long, for instance, and we also would like to know how long calls are. This is something actually that some call centers really do track thoroughly. As a little example, my brother worked for a call center for a while. He was doing in the health industry, so he kind of worked looking at and answering insurance questions and things like that. And their management team kept track of how long each employee was on the phone with each customer. And they did not want their employees on the phone very long. So, every company is different. So his company wanted phone calls to be very short. Their goal was to answer as many customers as possible in a day, more so than, I don't want to say providing quality care there, because they wanted to do that too, but they wanted you to do it as fast as possible. They didn't want people lingering on the phone. And they actually did keep track of his call times very thoroughly and looked at his average call times. So that's kind of what we're looking at today in this first video. So some formulas that we're going to use here are these two right here. So how to convert something to minutes and how to convert something to seconds. Now for the duration, what we're looking at is actually a fraction of the day. So I'm going to show you when we go in and we subtract these columns or these cells that we're looking at. You're going to see that first because it's written in a time format. It's going to be in the wrong format. We'll have to tweak it. And then once we do that, it's initially actually written as a fraction of a day in decimal form, which is not super helpful, right? I don't really need to know that the call time was, 0.0012 parts of a day. That doesn't really make sense. I would rather have that be in seconds or minutes, something that's more understandable. So these are the formulas we're going to use. Now, where do they come from? How do these conversions work mathematically? So the way the 24 and the 60s work here is the 24 is because there are 24 hours in a day. And then the 60, depending on how much you want to break it down, 60 here is because there are 60 minutes in an hour. And then if you want to go to seconds, you would multiply by another 60 because there are 60 seconds in a minute. This is actually a great application of dimensional analysis, if anybody knows that, or working with ratios and proportions, if you're doing it by hand, how to convert units. So that's what's going on here. The 24 represents the 24 hours in a day. And then 160 represents going from hours to minutes, right? Because 60 minutes in an hour. And then the second 60 here represents going from minutes to seconds, multiplying by that other 60 because there are also 60 seconds in every minute. So let's look at our call center log here. And like I said, it's already pre-set up for us. We'd really like to know how long people are waiting in seconds, and then how long those phone calls are in minutes. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to start, and we kind of start pretty normally, I think, where you're looking and say, okay, well, a phone call came in at exactly 8 a.m. and it was answered at 8 o'clock and 5 seconds, so 5 seconds later. Or here, this phone call came in at 1 second past 8 o'clock, and it was answered at 11 seconds past 8 o'clock. So you have hours, minutes, seconds as the time, which is a little bit more detailed than probably most of us are used to. So in this first case, I would love to see the answer of 5 seconds here, right? Or in the second case, 10 seconds have gone by. I would like my answer to be 10 seconds. So I need to figure out a formula to make that work. So my initial thinking is that I'm going to subtract these two values, right? Because here 5 seconds have passed, 5 minus 0 is 5. Or here 11 seconds minus 1 second is 10, right? So it kind of naturally feels for subtraction. And I'm going to do that first. So I'm going to hit this cell and subtract it with this cell. Again, watching my order here. Subtraction is not commutative, so order does matter. And when I do that, I see that it kind of gives me a really weird answer. It's not what I was looking for. And part of the problem is because this column is formatted as date and time. So I do need to go in and change that formatting. I'm going to go back to my home key up top here. And you can see that it has a custom formatting, as this one does too. So they had done custom date and time formattings here, or just date and time formatting. So we need to change that. And I'm going to put that as a general formatting instead. And again, I get something really, really weird here, because what I'm actually looking at is a fraction of the day. And just so you know, if you see an E with a negative number, it actually means to move that decimal point, in this case, 5 spots to the left. So this is a very, very small number. It's a very small fraction of the day, right? 5 seconds. So I need to convert this into seconds form. So I'm going to go ahead and do what we were talking about. I'm going to multiply by 24 because it's 24 hours in a day. I'm going to multiply by 60 to get from hours to minutes, because 60 minutes in an hour. And I'm going to multiply by another 60 to get down to seconds, because there's 60 seconds in each minute. And when I do that, and I got to change my format again, let's go here to general, then I get that 5 that I'm looking for. So that looks a lot better here, and that makes more sense. Now, if I want to do minutes here, so if I want to think about the call time, right, how long was the call? Well, this call was answered at 8 o'clock in the morning in 5 seconds, and it was completed at 8:20 and 42 seconds. So it's a little bit over 20 minutes long, right? So I would like to have that in minutes here. So again, I'm going to do a similar kind of process where when I first subtract, this minus this to get that change in time, again, I'm getting this really weird answer. That's not really what I'm looking for. So I'm going to change my format just to general. And then I'm also going to change my formula. So I'm going to put my subtraction in parentheses here because I do want that to happen first. And then I just need to go to minutes. So I'm going to multiply by 24 and then by 60 to get from the hours to the minutes piece and hit enter. And again, my formatting didn't hold there. So I'm just going to go ahead and fix that again. And now I do see that I have 20 minutes and 0.6 minutes after that. So this 0.6 is not seconds or anything like that. It's still in minutes form. So this phone call was about 20.6 minutes long. Okay, so that is one way that we can deal with date and time here as well. I do want to note a few things. So one, you do see constants in this formula, right? The 24 and the 60. I don't typically recommend putting constants in formulas, right? Because then if I want to change a formula, I have to constantly go in and find the exact formula that I put those constants in and change it. In previous videos, we tend to recommend to make sure you put your constants somewhere in a cell and then use cell references instead. Now, this is sort of an exception, and I'll tell you why. So in my professional opinion, what's happening with that 24 and that 60 is those constants are not going to be changing, right? There's always going to be 24 hours in a day and 60 minutes in an hour and 60 seconds in a minute. Those are not going to be changing. So in other cases, we'd like to put constants in cells because they could be changing over time. These are not changing. So I don't think there's anything wrong with putting them right in the formula here because they would be consistent for the life of this workbook. The other benefit to sometimes putting constants in formulas right away is that you don't have the chance that someone is going to change a cell by accident and kind of mess up all your formulas. So if it's not necessary to have it in a cell, like in this case, again, that 24 and 60 are never going to change, then you can put them right in the formula. So it is a decision that you have to make as the author of a workbook or of an Excel project. Again, usually for me, I tend to put constants in cells, and this would be an exception where they're not going to change. So it's fine to put it in the formula. I don't really need to call that out. And then I also have my formula in key terms page as well to let others know how I was using those formulas. So I do have that reference there too. All right, so the other thing I want to do here is just do a little bit with autofill, and we've been doing this already. So the idea of copying that same formula down over and over again, right? I don't really want to rewrite this formula over and over down the entire column. I'm going to be there all day. So I would like to just have that copied down for me. So I'm going to use that autofill feature, and I know I've shown you guys that before. So I'm going to click the cell where my formula is, and then I'm going to hover over that bottom square, and I get that little plus sign there. And what I can do is I can drag this down, and it will go ahead and copy that. Now, before I move my mouse, see how there's this little box that opened here? That will extend your autofill options. Now, in the past, they've been pretty straightforward, so we just copied down and we've kind of moved on with our lives. But here, notice when I do that, it's copying this cell, so it's also copying the formatting. So if I just do a straight like autofill, straight copy, it's going to copy this cell, and it's copying that same color in the background, which is not really what I wanted. So what I can do instead, if I have to be a little bit more careful with my copying or my autofill, is when that little box pops up, you're going to click it, and then instead of doing the straight copy cells, I can fill without formatting. So you have a few options here. You could copy the cell like we have been. So that's pretty easy for straightforward, more basic spreadsheets where you don't have a lot of background color and things like that. Fill formatting only actually just changes the formatting, right? It copies the formatting, not everything else. And then fill without formatting copies the formula that I'm using, but it doesn't change the background colors that are already there or the other formatting that I may have in place, like font and things like that. Flash fill, we don't need to use here. It's usually used for other patterns and things like that. So we can play around with that another time. But those for now are probably going to be the main ones that you're going to use. So I'm going to click fill without formatting. And now you'll see that it filled my formula, but it didn't change my background colors. So I didn't edit that format. Again, I always encourage you guys to just pick out a cell or two. Make sure it actually did what you wanted it to do, right? Is it actually drawing the correct cells, right? This one says G12 and F12, which is what I wanted, right? So it is copying the correct way. And then I could also drag that all the way down as well. Again, and just keep going for the entire document. And again, I'm going to choose to fill without formatting because I like my background colors that back and forth. So I want to leave that alone. And I can do the same thing here with my duration in minutes. Again, I'm just going to go ahead and I'm going to go ahead and copy those down. A lot of data here, down to 500 rows there. Let's see, and I'm going to fill without formatting there. Now, again, I always encourage you just to kind of click a couple cells, make sure it's actually doing what you want it to do. We know with copying, things can get a little bit weird, so you want to check those. Make sure it makes sense. Look at the first answer. We said the first answer should have been 5. It is here. We said this answer should have been 10 seconds. It is. Right? Over here, we said that it would be a little over 20 minutes. It is, right? When we did 8:20 minus 8 o'clock, right? So you want to just check and make sure your formulas are doing what they're supposed to be doing. And that's why you do need a little bit of a math background, some basic arithmetic and algebra in order to be able to check your Excel spreadsheets. All right, let's do one more autofill here. And again, you can kind of play around with the autofill stuff at home. You can do patterns as well. So, you could also start like typing in a pattern, maybe 1, I'm going to change this in a second, but 2, 3, 4, etc. And you could, use that as well as like other patterns. So Excel is pretty good at recognizing different patterns here and how to continue on after that as well. So one thing I want to show you guys too with that autofill option, here I'm kind of starting, I'm going to change my case numbers to something a little bit more complicated in a second. But let's say I'm just using the pattern 1, 2, 3, 4, right? I really do not want to have to type 5, 6, 7, 8, all the way down to 500, right? That's too much. But you do want to be careful with the autofill feature. If I just select the value of 4 and I try to autofill that, you're going to see that only the number 4 is autofilling because I've only selected the number 4. So Excel thinks I want that to copy down. What you can do instead is you can highlight the whole pattern, 1, 2, 3, 4. And then when you go to autofill it, Excel will start to recognize that pattern. So they'll continue with 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So sometimes you do have to give Excel a little bit more. And if you have a pattern in previous cells, you may need to highlight them all so Excel recognizes that you want the pattern copied, not just that single cell in this case. So again, it helps to kind of just play around at home and always check and make sure it's doing what you want it to do. Notice here it actually copied the correct formatting as well because Excel recognized that there was a pattern in the formatting here. So I didn't have to do ignore the formatting. I just copied it and Excel recognized that pattern in this case. All right, now what your book wants to do is a little bit more complicated case number. So it's going to be case, and then the first one is going to be 50127. And we could even try copying something like this. And you can see I got to fix the formatting, but notice how it anticipated the pattern there. So 50127, 50128, 50129, 50130, etc. So you can continue this way as well. I'm going to just go back for a second. I'm going to drag that down the whole column here. And I do want to make sure this time I fill without formatting because I only selected one cell. It wasn't recognizing the formatting in the background as being different from cell to cell. I just saw the yellow. So copy that. So I want to make sure I do not copy that formatting. And again, just give it a quick check. Is it doing what you want it to do? It is. So this is looking pretty good. And we got to kind of play around with some of those features. So I encourage you to read your text too. It does go through other patterns that you could use, right? Excel can recognize things like counting by even numbers instead, right? If you give it 2, 4, 6, 8, it can continue that pattern. Or it can recognize data within your table. For instance, like let's say you have employee names written as, last name, comma, first name. And you start to separate out the first and last names into different columns. You can use flash fill, the auto flash fill, and that will recognize that, hey, you're trying to separate out some data, and it will pull it from the Excel file too. So autofill is actually a really nice and robust feature. So again, read through your text to see some other examples that you could do as well with it. And just kind of, play around and make sure it's doing what you want.